All right, 131, folks. I'm still talking about Unit 3, still talking about Chapter 5, still talking about the Revolutionary War because I feel like it's important. Getting to talk about Kings Mountain, I think, is huge because that's part of the Southern strategy. What you have to realize is this: there's a turning point in the war. Washington is going to press his advantages up north. He's going to start to win. He's going to start to collect momentum. And what's going to happen is that the British General Cornwallis, who is supposed to be a master of strategy, is going to, what we need to do? We need to kind of change this up. We are expending a lot of forces struggling here. We're spending a lot of forces struggling in the south. I think what we're going to do is we're going to take our main forces and go south. We'll leave a few up here to engage Washington and mop up, but we'll go to the south. And what we can do is we can start in the far south and sweep up. Come from Georgia into South Carolina, into North Carolina, gather some troops because, again, that's supposed to be a hotbed of loyalist activity. And so he figures he can unite the South under the British banner, come up, and then use those extra forces, use that momentum to go ahead and just cap things off in the North. Unfortunately, he's going to run into some problems. The Over Mountain Men, the Kings Mountain battle is just one of them. Surely, most folks know that Charlotte, if you look at their police badge is in the shape of a hornet. Charlotte, the idea that the idea that the hornet's nest, which is where the Hornets play basketball at, those aren't just gimmicks, folks. Those are relating to history because it turns out that Charlotte was considered a hornet's nest, a hotbed of activity amongst the revolution. And so what happens is Cornwallis wants to eventually sweep in and take care of the problems in North Carolina and Charlotte and keep on going north. What happens is this: because he withdraws and goes south, and yeah, he's successful in the south, but that leaves Washington up north, and Washington's going to press his advantage, and the British commanders that are left behind aren't capable of dealing with Washington and his forces, and he's going to get some support. He's going to get support finally from the French. It turns out that we have made enough of an impression on the French for them to become actively involved. They're going to bring in their ships. They're going to bring in their fleet. They're not going to bring so much soldiers. They're going to bring their fleet, and they're going to cut off access for the British fleet. They're going to cut off access for British supplies. That's one of the huge problems we're looking at, folks. The Americans don't have supplies. They don't have the military. They don't have the things they need in funding, but they can live largely off the land. The British are having to ship everything from Europe because they're not being supplied the way they thought they would by the loyal colonialists. And so it's a really expensive war for them. Well, when Cornwallis shifts to the south, that leaves Washington dominated in the north. And where there's enough forces that are supposed to cap him off and take care of him, he's able, with the ability of the French, the help of the French, to outmaneuver them. And because he can outmaneuver them, he's going to win up there and be able to sweep down with those same forces into the south. Because Cornwallis, between Cowpens, between Guilford Courthouse, between Kings Mountain, is going to suffer a series of setbacks. Is, what we're going to do? We're going to go ahead and withdraw our forces. We're going to camp here, and then what he's expecting is he's expecting his forces to come in from the north, to be transported by the ships, to get brand new supplies and brand new soldiers via the ships. And it turns out that the French forces have arrived. The French fleet has arrived and cut them off. So there's going to be a huge change at this particular point because of what's happening. You're going to get the loss of the Civil War by the British. Cornwallis is going to have to surrender, and that creates some huge changes post-war with what's going on. And so, yeah, the revolution is indeed going to be revolutionary. It's indeed going to change a lot of things. We're going to end up with the Treaty of Paris in 1783. We're going to look at Republican ideology saying, listen, let's go ahead and shelf this king. Let's go ahead and shelf this loyalist, royalist thing. And they're going to work to go ahead and use what they've got in this Continental Congress and create a democracy. The problem is, what is the democracy? Is it a direct democracy? Is it representative democracy? Who's going to have the most power? And so what we end up with is we end up with a lot of colonies that are worried about a king. We have a lot of colonies that are worried about a central power. We have a lot of colonies that are worried about losing control of their own destiny. And so what we end up with is a makeshift document. We end up with the Articles of Confederation. And the Articles of Confederation is really our first ruling document. It's huge because it lets us operate independently together. The problem is we're going to agree on certain things. We're going to end up with each state creating, it is a state at this point, creating its own laws, its own ideas for change, and unfortunately, we're operating independently together. So where we promise to cooperate, we don't promise not to tax goods going from one state to another. Where we decide that we are indeed liberated, that we are indeed going to act together, we're not going to create a standing army. We're not going to promise or do more than promise funding for taxes and things. And so there's a lot of disorganization, a lot of disruption at this particular point. We go ahead and we shelf the British, but that doesn't take care of all our problems with the British. It doesn't fix all the issues we're having, because not all the issues were with the British. And so we're going to continue to look at some struggles. If you take a look at the book, it mentions Robert Shurtleff. It mentions Samuel Gay. That's important because one of the things we're looking at this point also is the struggle for women's rights. One of the characters people mention that is Abigail Adams. Abigail Adams is kind of interesting because she is John Adams' wife. And when John is going off to help create laws, she says, "Yo, John, come here, bud. I want you to remember the ladies, because we have struggled along with you, and if you don't give us a government that gives us some rights, you might have to be dealing with a revolution with us." Keep in mind also that we create this better environment, we create this egalitarian society, but we keep Native Americans, we keep what are our formerly Africans, now African Americans, we keep women very much on the bottom level of this egalitarian society. So it's not quite equal, and it's far from perfect. It's not even a good form of democracy, but it is much better than what we're leaving behind. All right, go ahead and take a look at this, and I'll hit a little bit on this next chapter. I think it's chapter 6, and let you run from there.